Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a land where the sun never seems to blink, where linen robes flutter in dry breezes, and where the pyramids aren't the only things chiseled by hand, because your teeth are about to be too. That's right, we're heading to ancient Egypt, and your gums are not ready. You're a humble Egyptian making your way through another sweltering day, and somewhere beneath the shadow of a half-built obelisk, your jaw starts to throb. Imagine it now, the scent of fresh-cut papyrus in the air, the sandy crunch of breakfast still grinding between your molars, and a relentless pulsing pain shooting up your face. You press a hand to your cheek. Oh yes, this one's going to be a doozy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where are you listening from and what time is it there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a reed mat bed, not far from the Nile. Your little home is simple, mud brick walls, a thatched roof, a clay pot for water, and a whole lot of ache radiating from your lower jaw. Outside, the sun's already started its climb, glaring down on a world of plough's prayers and poorly made dental decisions. Breakfast waits in a basket flatbread that's seen better days, some onions, maybe a dried fig if you're lucky. You bite down, and there it is again. A zap. Like a tiny spear to the face. Toothache. And this isn't some little sting. No. This is an ongoing war between your teeth and the wheat ground with sand-dusted millstones. Every meal in Egypt, no matter how blessed by Ra, brings with it a little crunch of quartz, a sprinkle of sandstone. Dental hygiene isn't even a concept yet. You clean your teeth with a twig if you remember. The problem lies in the very thing that sustains you bread. Bread is life. Bread is wages. Bread is kind of lethal, actually. You chew on it daily, sometimes hourly. And because the flour is ground on open stone slabs, basically ancient sandpaper, you're getting more than just carbohydrates. You're getting enamel erosion in every bite. So of course you're not alone. Everyone in your household complains of sore gums. You've seen your uncle try to suck honey through a reed because he couldn't chew. You've watched your neighbor shove cloves into a cavity and scream. And there's always that one old woman who claims she hasn't felt pain since she smeared fig sap on her forehead. You don't ask questions. You hear about someone called a swandwas, a healer of sorts. They're not quite a doctor, not quite a priest, but someone with access to the temples, and more importantly, the temple scrolls. Maybe they can help. You drag your feet across the dusty lane toward the temple complex, jaw clamped shut, wincing at every step. The temple itself is massive cool, shaded by carved stone columns covered in hieroglyphs. There's incense in the air, myrrh, perhaps. Someone is chanting softly. A young acolyte sees you, nods toward a corridor, and there you find the Swandwiyo. He's older than expected. Robed, calm, smelling faintly of onions and ink. He regards your swollen cheek, makes a humming sound, and pulls out a thick scroll. Papyrus Ebers, perhaps it's said to be one of the oldest medical texts in existence. He runs his finger along the lines until he finds it a remedy for aching teeth. He reads it aloud. Something about moldy bread mashed and applied as a poultice. You blink. Bread, that stuff that caused the problem in the first place. He assures you it's different. Bread left in the dark, he says. Let the gods rot it just enough. Then it heals. The logic, twisted as it sounds, is partly right. Modern science would eventually discover that certain molds do produce antibacterial compounds. In fact, penicillin is just fancy mold, but you don't know that. You just want the pain to stop. So he mashes up some old bread, mixes it with honey and antiseptic, known even then, and applies it to the sore area. The feeling is strange, cooling, tingling, not entirely unpleasant. You're told to leave it on for a while. No biting, no speaking. Just lie there, breathe through your nose, and let mold work its magic. Outside the temple, the sun has reached its peak. You lie on a woven mat, trying not to think about how many other mouths this healer has treated with the same tools. Hygiene isn't really part of the program. You begin to drift. The chants echo through the halls. The scent of incense wraps around you. Your jaw still throbs, but less now. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's just the placebo effect. Or maybe it's the exhaustion of being up since dawn, with nothing but dusty bread to your name. One thing's certain, the Egyptians had a thing for persistence. They didn't give up on life just because it hurt. They prayed, they experimented, they even let mold into their mouths on purpose. Historians still debate whether this treatment was a stroke of accidental genius or just ancient guesswork. Was it empirical observation? Was it divine instruction? Or did someone just leave their sandwich out too long and notice their gum infection cleared up? Either way, here you are half dozing, half hoping, and entirely done with bread for the foreseeable future. You wake the next morning with a dull ache still pulsing through your jaw. Outside, the Nile glints in the early light, a glimmering ribbon of calm amid a dusty world. You stretch, yawn, and reach for breakfast, because even toothache can't compete with morning hunger. On the mat sits a simple spread, yesterday's leftover flatbread, a few preserved dates, and a small jug of beer. Yes, beer for breakfast. Welcome to ancient Egypt. You take a bite, cautiously avoiding the sore side of your mouth. Crunch. Grit. The unmistakable crackle of sand between your teeth. And now we're going to talk about that. Egyptians were master bakers. They loved bread. They worshipped it. It was so essential, so holy, that the word for bread, tias, was part of the word for life itself. But here's the catch. Their bread could also kill your smile. Why? Because in the process of baking, the grain was ground between open stone querns. No sieves, no filters, no metal mills. Just two rough rocks scraping together like a dentist's worst nightmare. And if you're grinding grain in a desert, odds are some of that desert is going to end up in your dough. Archaeologists have examined bread loaves recovered from tombs charred like ancient toast and found tiny bits of quartz sand, even mica, embedded in them. In other words, Egyptian bread came with a side of natural exfoliant for your enamel. Every bite you took was like rubbing a pumice stone against your teeth. Over time, it wore them down. No wonder toothaches were so common. Now imagine this happening 3 times a day. Bread for breakfast bread, with onions for lunch bread, with lentils for dinner. Throw in a few figs and the occasional dried fish, and you've got a menu designed to grind your molars to dust. It wasn't just nourishment, it was a slow march toward dental destruction. Let's not forget the beer. Yes, the beer was nutritious, thick, unfiltered, more like liquid bread than the crisp pilsners of today. It was a staple safe to drink and packed with calories. But beer also meant more acid in your mouth, more sugar to feed the bacteria that cause decay. You're basically sipping cavity juice with every mug. And if you think this only affected the poor, think again. Even royal mummies wrapped in linens soaked with perfume and laid to rest with gold have been found with jaws full of abscesses. Pharaohs may have had pyramids, but they didn't have floss. Meanwhile, you're chewing slowly, trying not to make things worse. You remember your neighbor's advice, chew papyrus stalks to clean your teeth. Maybe later. For now, you stare at the bread and sigh. A little boy walks by outside your hut, waving a date palm stick in the air like a sword. He grins, revealing a mouth full of young white teeth. Give him 10 years. By then, the bread will have done its work. Historians often debate whether the ancient Egyptians understood the connection between their bread and their dental problems. Some argue they must have noticed the pattern. Others say they chalked it up to divine will or angry spirits in the gums. After all, why would the gods curse their most sacred food? But maybe they weren't cursed. Maybe they just didn't have a choice. When grain is your currency, your ration, your worship offering, when bread is life, you eat it, sand and all. So here you are, a loyal eater of the staple of civilization, grinding your way through another slice of heritage, and wondering quietly how much longer your back teeth can take it. You brush away a few crumbs, sip your thick morning beer, and try not to think about the pulsing in your jaw. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays. The air smells of baking and river mud. Another day in paradise, one bite closer to another appointment with the temple healer. You try to work through the pain, convincing yourself that maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it'll fade. Maybe chewing on the other side of your mouth will help. It doesn't. The pain is like a little god of thunder has set up residence in your jaw and won't stop banging his drum. You wince again and again until you give up and lean against the mud brick wall, breathing slow, shallow breaths, trying not to clench your teeth. Toothache in ancient Egypt was not an isolated nuisance. It was a national condition. In fact, some scholars have cheekily suggested that if you were Egyptian and didn't have a dental problem, you were probably a statue. You're not alone in your suffering. Excavated skulls from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period show extreme wear on teeth, flattened crowns, exposed pulp, and teeth worn down so far they barely rise above the gum line. Many of these ancient Egyptians didn't die of old age. They lived long enough to be slowly tortured by their own molars. Tooth decay was common, but it was only one of the culprits. Periodontal disease ran rampant. Infection was practically guaranteed if decay reached the inner pulp. Your body's immune system could only do so much. Eventually, the infection would spread into the jaw, the sinuses, even the brain. And with no antibiotics, well, let's just say you might meet Osiris sooner than expected. Let's paint a vivid picture. Your cheek is swollen. Your breath smells questionable. You taste a hint of metal on your tongue. And the right side of your face feels like it's radiating heat. You lie in bed, hoping to fall asleep, but the throb in your mouth won't let you. You press a hand to your cheek and whisper a plea to the gods. Nothing changes. And still, you're expected to work. The harvest won't wait. The fields need tending. The granaries need filling. You gather your tools and head out anyway. Everyone does. Toothache or no toothache, the crops must be reaped. Now, you may wonder, did Egyptians have any way of diagnosing what was wrong inside the mouth? Not exactly. They didn't have mirrors as we know them, and certainly no x-rays or dental probes. Diagnosis relied on visible symptoms and intuition. If your face was swollen, that was a sign. If you moaned in pain when eating, that was a sign. If a neighbor offered to punch you so the tooth would fall out on its own well, that was probably less diagnostic and more wishful thinking. Despite the challenges, some Egyptians did develop an awareness of internal oral issues. They might not have known the terms abscess or nerve exposure, but they understood bad pain deep inside, and they had dozens of remedies to address it. Some herbal, some magical, some truly baffling. Mainstream historians often cite the Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1550 BCE, which contains over 700 magical formulas and remedies. Several of them refer specifically to tooth pain. One common solution was a paste made of cumin, frankincense, and onion applied directly to the gums. Did it work? Maybe. Or maybe it just made your breath spicy enough to frighten the pain away. Quirky fact of the day. Some recipes included lizard fat and crushed mice. Not applied, externally ingested. That's right. Ancient folk medicine thought a dead rodent smoothie might help with your jaw. It didn't. So back to you. Your pain has evolved. It's no longer just a sensation. It's a personality. You've named it. You talk to it in the early hours of dawn when you can't sleep. You bargain with it. Let me get through the workday, and I'll skip onions for a week, you whisper. It doesn't listen. In the temple, the priests say illness comes from the imbalance of the body and the will of the gods. Some even believe demons cause dental pain, tiny spirits burrowing into your teeth with little picks. There are spells for this. You're given one to recite at night, something about banishing the gnawing shade. You try it. It feels more comforting than effective. Meanwhile, archaeologists and scholars today still argue about how much the ancient Egyptians actually understood their oral health problems. Were they intuitive scientists, blind guessers, or something in between? Most agree that while they lacked microscopes and modern medicine, Egyptians did observe cause and effect with surprising accuracy. They noticed patterns. They recorded symptoms. They tried things. Sure, not all of those things were brilliant, but some were. And their documentation laid the groundwork for later medical advances. But that's centuries away. For now, you're standing in your kitchen corner, cradling your face, hoping anyone will bring you a clove, a poultice, or maybe a chisel. Because right now, all you have is your bread, your beer, your sandpaper smile, and the throb that never stops. The morning is already hot when you finally decide to seek help. The pain has outlasted your patience. It hums like an angry wasp beneath your cheekbone, and you've run out of herbs, prayers, and dignity. The temple is your only option now. You shuffle through the dusty streets toward the compound of the local healer, the Swandias. You've heard about this mysterious figure your whole life. Some say they can summon the gods. Others whisper that they learned their craft from scrolls so ancient the ink itself is a form of magic. But mostly you hear that they're good with wounds, fevers, and even toothaches when the gods are willing. The temple looms ahead, carved stone rising from the sand like a giant fossilized promise. Inside, the air is thick with incense and the low hum of prayers being chanted in rhythm. You follow the sound, stepping carefully past rows of columns inscribed with divine offerings. You feel the weight of every eye carved into the walls watching. A young apprentice greets you with a nod and leads you through a long corridor that smells of myrrh, stale herbs, and something faintly metallic. At the end is the chamber of the unsolved. You step inside and try not to show how much your face hurts. The unsolved is seated on a low stool hunched over a wooden table cluttered with jars, scrolls, and tools that resemble tiny farming implements. He wears a robe stained with streaks of green and brown. His head is shaved, his eyebrows thick, and he peers at you like someone examining a cracked pot. He gestures for you to sit. You open your mouth slightly and try to explain the pain. He listens, nods, then begins poking at your jaw with a long, curved reed dipped in oil. You flinch. He grunts. That's about the extent of your diagnosis. Then he begins to speak not to you, but to himself, muttering about imbalances, the dryness of the body, the rising of Sekhmet's fire. He flips through a scroll carefully, reverently, until he finds a passage marked with a charcoal symbol of a tooth. This is no ordinary scroll. It's a medical text passed down from healer to healer. You glimpse the flowing symbols, pictures of mouths, teeth, herbs, and something that looks suspiciously like a snake fighting a loaf of bread. The unsolved explains slowly that your tooth is possessed by heat and that a poultice must be prepared to draw it out. You nod, because what else can you do? He reaches for a stone jar and pulls out a lump of something brown and crumbly dried moldy bread. Fermented in darkness, he says. The shadow keeps its power alive. He crumbles it into a bowl, adds a bit of honey, some powdered incense, and a few drops of beer. The mixture looks like it belongs in a bakery dumpster, but he stirs it with great care. Then he reaches for a fine linen cloth, spreads the paste inside, folds it, and presses the warm compress against your cheek. The sensation is unexpected. Sharp, tingly, slightly sweet-smelling. Your eyes water. As you sit there, he hums an invocation under his breath, something to do with Anubis and restoration. It's unclear whether the ritual is for your tooth or his own peace of mind. Either way, it's oddly comforting. Now here's the thing about unsolved, they were a bit of everything. Part priest, part pharmacist, part proto-dentist. They dealt with physical ailments, but also emotional, spiritual, and astrological ones. They were trained in temple schools and could recite verses from medical papyri that would make even a modern physician pause. But did they understand what they were doing? Historians still argue. Some say the unsolved were empirical observers, men who noticed that moldy bread helped with swelling long before bacteria were discovered. Others believe they were mostly guided by ritual, guessing their way through treatments, and trusting in the gods to do the rest. One thing is clear, their patients didn't have many alternatives. As you sit there with mold compressing your face and incense curling around your ears, you wonder which camp your healer falls into. He begins to mix another preparation. This time, he crushes carob juniper and dried lizard scales. For strength, he says, you don't ask questions. You just nod, because the pain has dulled to a tolerable throb, and questioning the man who makes the pain stop seems like a terrible idea. You're not alone in your confusion. Most people then and now don't know whether the swan was a genius, a quack, or just someone who had access to the good jars. But you feel something you haven't felt in days, a little hope. Your pain isn't gone, but it's muted. Like someone turned the volume down on your suffering. Maybe the bread was sacred. Maybe it was science. Or maybe you're just finally too tired to notice. The swanwas pats your shoulder and whispers a blessing over your head. You leave the chamber lighter woozy and smelling faintly of beer and herbs. Outside, the sun still blazes, but the world feels quieter. A breeze rises from the river. You touch your cheek. Still sore, but better. You're back home now, resting against your mat, trying not to drool onto your own shoulder, as the faint scent of fermented bread clings to your face. Your jaw still throbs faintly, but that savage, stabbing pain has ebbed into something duller, more manageable. Maybe the SWNW was onto something after all. You think back to that moment in the temple, the way he mashed the moldy bread, added honey, folded it in linen like he was wrapping a sacred amulet. At the time, you weren't sure whether it was medicine or witchcraft? Now you're beginning to wonder, was it both? Here's the surprising part. In hindsight, by which we mean thousands of years of scientific hindsight, Egyptian medicine might have accidentally stumbled onto one of the greatest healing tools in history: antibiotics. Let's talk about mold. You probably think of it as something gross that ruins figs and spoils date cakes. And yes, it absolutely does. But under certain conditions, mold specifically from the penicillium family can produce antibacterial compounds. You know it today as penicillin, discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928. But the concept, it might have been accidentally discovered far earlier by people who had no idea what bacteria were, but still noticed, hey, this moldy stuff sometimes works. In ancient Egypt, the mold wasn't cultured in a lab. It grew in the back of the bread pile, in that forgotten corner of the pantry, where the Nile's humidity turned food into fuzz. Instead of tossing it, someone decided to try it. Desperation. Divine inspiration. Who knows? So how did this knowledge survive? Well, Egyptian medical papyri, like the Ebers and Hurst texts, contain dozens of remedies that mention fermented substances. While they don't spell out mold, shikshikutos antibiotic, they do repeat recipes involving decayed bread, sour milk, and old beer, all of which could host microbial growth. The outcomes anecdotally effective. Of course, they didn't understand microbes. They believed illness came from spiritual imbalance, the wrath of gods, or the blockage of internal pathways. But they did understand cause and effect. When they applied moldy bread and the swelling reduced, they remembered. They passed the recipe on. Modern scientists have tested some of these methods. In lab settings, they've recreated Egyptian poultices using ancient ingredients, and in some cases miraculously found actual antimicrobial properties. Not all combinations work. Some are just compost, but others legitimately effective, and that's what makes it all so oddly beautiful. These weren't trained biologists. These were desperate people paying attention. Trial and error became tradition. Maybe that bread your healer applied to your face wasn't just superstition. It was pre-scientific brilliance. Now imagine being the first person to make this discovery. You're in pain. You press some rotting bread to your cheek, not because you think it's medicine, but because it's soft and maybe cool. A few hours later, the swelling has reduced. Coincidence? Maybe, but you remember it. You do it again. You tell others. Soon it becomes a ritual, then a practice, then a profession. And here you are, thousands of years later, feeling the faintest edge of relief, all thanks to a trick discovered in the shadows of the granary. Historians love to argue about this kind of thing. Was it deliberate discovery? Was it a lucky accident? Did they know they were cultivating healing agents? Or were they just too thrifty to waste moldy bread? There's no single answer. But even without modern knowledge, ancient Egyptians had remarkable observational skills. They knew that moldy poultices sometimes helped. They knew honey prevented infection. They knew linen could hold a compress in place while still letting the skin breathe. They didn't need microscopes to spot patterns. Back in your hut, the late afternoon sun slants in through the doorway. You lie still. The world is warm and quiet. The ache has dulled into something you can almost ignore. You think of the healer's steady hands, the strange comfort of ritual, the smell of mold softened by honey, and you realize sometimes in a world of superstition and sand medicine grows in the most unexpected places, like the crust of a forgotten loaf fermenting in the dark, waiting to be found. Even as the moldy bread compress does its strange, squishy magic on your face, another thought creeps in. How else did Egyptians try to soothe their teeth if mold was a miracle? What was Plan B? The answer, dear listener, is crocodile dung. You blink. That can't be right. But yes, according to some historical references, crocodile dung was one of the many creative substances mixed into ancient Egyptian remedies. Sometimes for contraception, sometimes for magical rituals, and occasionally as part of an oral health routine. Let's rewind a bit. In ancient Egypt, the line between hygiene medicine and magic was thin, almost invisible. People believed that disease was not just a physical ailment, but a spiritual disruption. So your toothpaste wasn't just for cleaning. It was a potion, a prayer, an offering to your gums and to the gods. Enter the ancient Egyptian tooth powder. Forget your modern minty gels and vibrating brush heads. The ancient dental kit involved a dry, crumbly mix, stored in a small jar, sometimes clay, sometimes stone, with a lid tightly tied with linen. The ingredients: a dazzling array of substances: ground rock salt, crushed iris petals, pepper-dried myrrh, and yes, sometimes animal droppings, because why not crocodile dung in particular was seen as powerful. The animal itself was sacred, feared, and divine. So its excrement naturally magical. To use it, you'd wet a reed stick or finger dip it into the powder and scrub. The abrasiveness would help scrape away plaque, assuming your enamel survived the process. The added ingredients brought scent antibacterial properties, myrrh and pepper, for instance, and, well, the crocodile's contribution was probably more symbolic than sanitary. Then there's honey. Unlike the reptilian surprise, honey was a consistent player in Egyptian medicine, revered not just as a sweetener, but as a powerful healing substance. Honey was antibacterial, antifungal, and even soothing. It showed up in wound care cough syrups, and yes, dental remedies. Sometimes honey and dung were mixed. Pause and imagine that. A sticky, grainy blend packed into your mouth to draw out the bad spirits. Your breath probably could knock over a hippo, but maybe it helped. Of course not all these ingredients came from superstition. Myrrh and iris, for example, have real antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Salt dries out bacteria. Pepper stimulates circulation. Even the reed brushes frayed at the end acted like early toothbrushes. Still, not everything aged well. Some Egyptian toothpastes were so abrasive, they probably did more damage than good. Others, while chemically effective, were foul enough to make you consider simply living with the pain. Back in your hut, you think about trying one of these ancient mixes. You fish around your modest herb bundle, no crocodile dung here, thank the gods, and mash up some dried mint, a pinch of salt, and a little honey. You dab it onto a twig and rub it gently against your sore gum. The sweetness masks the sting. For a moment, it even feels soothing. You wonder if this is how it started. One person hurting, experimenting with whatever was on hand. A pinch of this, a smear of that. Pass the reed brush to your neighbor, and suddenly everyone in the village has opinions about which tooth powder really works. Historians still puzzle over how widespread some of these practices were. Were they prescribed only by temple healers? Or was every household mixing their own blend based on family lore and whatever animals wandered too close? Some records show that recipes varied widely, some more magical, others purely herbal. In fact, the Ebers Papyrus contains over a dozen references to dental pain remedies, most involving herbs, honey, and spiritual incantations. One even suggests reciting a spell while rubbing a fig leaf on the gums. It's unclear if the leaf mattered or if the gods just liked figs. Meanwhile, modern dental researchers have recreated some of these ancient tooth powders. They found that while the taste left much to be desired, some combinations genuinely cleaned teeth and reduced bacterial growth. Others, however, were just flavored sandpaper with a side of potential infection. So where does that leave you? Somewhere between skepticism and awe. You can't help but admire the creativity, the courage, the sheer audacity of it all. Using crocodile dung in your mouth takes a special kind of conviction or desperation. You rest your head against the cool clay wall, the last rays of sun painting gold across the floor. Your jaw is still tender, but your mouth feels cleaner, fresher, stranger. And in a weird, sleepy way, you feel grateful. Grateful for honey, for herbs, for whoever first thought, you know what this painful gum needs. A spoonful of swamp poop. Human ingenuity, after all, has always been a little unhinged. The next day, curiosity gets the better of you. The pain has eased thanks to mold, honey, divine luck, or all three, but a question still nags at you. What else do these temples hide? What other secrets are etched into the very stone of this place, where medicine and mysticism mix? You find yourself returning to the temple, not for treatment this time, but for exploration. The towering columns stretch above like stone trees, each one decorated with precise rhythmic carvings. Hieroglyphs march across the walls in rows surrounding depictions of gods, supplicants' offerings, and most interestingly, tools. A guide walks past an older temple scribe with ink-stained fingers and a surprisingly cheery expression. He sees your swollen cheek and winks. Tooth demon, he asks, as if it's a common joke. You nod. Come then. Let me show you how we bargain with pain. He leads you through a series of shadowed corridors where the air is cooler scented with stone and soot. Here, the walls tell stories not just of pharaohs and gods, but of healing. On one panel, a SW&W is shown mixing herbs in a bowl while priests chant. On another, a figure presses something to a patient's jaw while the god Thoth hovers above pen in hand as if recording the outcome. These aren't just art, the scribe whispers. They're instructions, manuals for those who know how to read them. You pause at one particularly vivid scene. A patient lies on a mat grimacing, while a priest pours something into his mouth from a narrow-necked jar. Around them, glyphs describe the ingredients onion beer, red clay, and a prayer to Sekhmet. Apparently, she governs not just war and plague, but tooth pain. Figures. These rituals were as much psychological as physical, the scribe explains. You weren't just healing the body. You were showing the gods your willingness to obey, to suffer, to endure. You ask about curses. He chuckles. Oh yes, curses too. Not just blessings here. If a patient disrespected the process, mocked the healer, spilled the poultice, skipped the chance the gods could turn their backs, or worse, send something extra. An infection, a fever, the hiccups, eternally. You stare at him. Eternally, he shrugs. That's what the glyph says. And now you understand Egyptian medicine wasn't just about poultices and herbs. It was theater, faith, fear. The act of healing mattered just as much as the remedy. If a ritual made you believe you were getting better, half the job was already done. The placebo effect thousands of years before the term existed. As you wander deeper, you find shelves carved into the stone walls, each one once holding scrolls and sacred tools. Some still remain clay models of teeth, small bronze implements shaped like tweezers or spatulas jars, labeled with faded ink. You recognize one, the same kind of container your healer used for the moldy bread. One tablet describes a mouth-cleaning day, a sacred event held twice a month. People would gather at the temple to wash their mouths with a mixture of natron and river water, recite purification prayers, and apply a balm to their gums. Social, spiritual, and slightly minty. Your scribe guide even points out a particular alcove where people were said to leave offerings in exchange for oral relief flowers, bits of bread, tiny carved teeth. One corner is dark and scorched by centuries of candlelight. It strikes you then how communal this experience was. Toothache wasn't a private misery. It was a shared condition woven into the fabric of life. From pharaohs to farmers, everyone had teeth, and those teeth had issues. Historians today debate how literal to take these temple carvings. Were they accurate records of medical practice or symbolic representations of divine healing? Some believe they were instructional, others think they were aspirational, idealized versions of treatment rather than reality. But the details are too specific to ignore. The tools, the sequences, the repetition. Someone carved these with intent. Back outside, you sit beneath a date palm, the temple rising behind you like a guardian of secrets. Your jaw still aches faintly, but your mind is busy processing everything you've seen. A world where healing meant mixing ingredients and incantations, where medicine wasn't separate from belief, it was belief in powdered form. You close your eyes and listen to the breeze, warm and dry. Somewhere nearby, someone is chanting, someone else is laughing, and above it all, the temple looms, part hospital, part cathedral, part university of things only half understood. And you, the patient-turned-wanderer, have just become part of that legacy. You return home with your head buzzing from temple visions, still feeling the faint pull of incense in your nostrils, and ancient wisdom echoing in your ears. But reality is a flat piece of stale bread. Literally. Your neighbor has brought over a small offering, day-old loaves in a rough linen pouch. You're hungry, of course. You always are. But as you stare at the bread, you remember the grinding, the gnashing, and the way the scribe's voice dropped when he said, "The flour was the true villain." So let's talk about that flour. Egyptian bread began as emmer wheat or barley, ancient grains that grew well in the Nile's silted soil. Farmers harvested it by hand, bundled it into sheaves, threshed it on packed earth, then stored it in large ceramic silos until it was needed. But the real crime began at the grinding stage. To make, flour families would place the grain on a large flat stone called a saddle quern and rub it back and forth with another stone until it became powder. This rubbing day in and day out wore grooves into the stone, which created grit. That grit mixed in with the flour unnoticed, or worse, completely ignored. The result, a fine powder speckled with mineral flakes sharp enough to etch glass. And it wasn't just a trace amount. Studies of ancient Egyptian teeth show extensive enamel loss with horizontal grooves and exposed dentin. Picture a mouth where the outer shield is gone, the soft inner pulp exposed to every bite. You break off a piece of bread and stare at it. It looks innocent enough, rough, flat brown. But inside that humble disc lies 1,000 cuts waiting to happen. And this was normal, acceptable, even celebrated. Bread wasn't just food, it was currency. Wages were often paid in loaves. Workers building pyramids received daily rations of beer and bread. Temples gave it as alms. Families offered it to the dead. Bread was sacred. And yet, it was quietly destroying everyone's dental health. The irony is almost painful. Still, what were the alternatives? Boiling grain into porridge helped, but porridge didn't travel well, didn't last, and didn't fill your stomach in the same satisfying way. Bread was portable, durable, symbolic. You could hold it, store it, trade it, share it, so people kept grinding. And with every pass of the stone, another sliver of grit was added to the collective mouth trauma of the population. Some wealthier families used finer grinding tools, or tried to sift the flour with linen, but these were small gestures. For the most part, Egyptian bread was crunchy in all the wrong ways. Of course, people adapted. You learned to chew slowly, to avoid the worst parts, to develop jaw muscles that could handle the grind. You become a connoisseur of bread texture. This one's a bit softer. This one's got less bite that one could probably chip a statue. You try your neighbor's loaf. Predictably, you crunch. Your jaw protests, but you chew anyway. Hunger trumps hesitation. Always has. Historians today marvel at the duality of Egyptian bread, how something so fundamental could be so harmful. But they also admire the ingenuity, grinding, baking, preserving all without electricity or steel. It was a miracle of ancient logistics, with one unfortunate side effect. Some researchers have recreated Egyptian bread using ancient methods. Their results, dry, dense, and surprise full of sand. It turns out it's not just theory, it's teeth-tested. And so you sit there, jaw half numb, trying to appreciate the labor that went into your small, destructive meal. You picture a line of people kneeling at grinding stones, rubbing endlessly, coughing in clouds of flour dust. You wonder if they ever looked up and asked, "Why does this food hate us?" Probably not. They were too busy surviving. Bread filled the belly. That was enough. But now, with your jaw still tender, and your mind sharpened by temple tales, you see it differently. Bread isn't just nourishment, it's an ancient dental trap. A necessary evil. A sacred snack with a sharp side. And yet, tomorrow, you'll eat it again. Because in Egypt, bread is life, even when it bites back. The pain returns. Not the dull throb you'd grown used to. No, this is something sharper, angrier, like a red-hot needle driven into the hinge of your jaw. You try clove. Doesn't work. You hum the prayer to Sekhmet. She must be busy. Eventually you reach the only remaining conclusion: the tooth must go. But this is ancient Egypt. There's no sterile dental office. No reclining chair. No Novocaine. There is only ingenuity and sticks. Tooth extraction in ancient Egypt wasn't common, but it did happen. Most Egyptians simply lived with their dental misery, but in some cases like yours, the pain became unbearable. When chewing is impossible, when even honey stings like acid, when your face is so swollen you scare the neighbor's goat, it's time. You shuffle toward the edge of the village where a craftsman lives. Not a physician exactly, but someone known for having steady hands. He carves wooden figurines and mends broken plows, and on occasion pulls teeth. He greets you with a solemn nod. No need for words. The look on your face says it all. He leads you to a shaded spot behind his hut. You sit on an overturned amphora. He rummages through a basket and pulls out his tools, a sturdy piece of palm wood, a length of linen string, and a small cup of beer. For you, not for him. You drink. It doesn't help. He asks you to open your mouth. He examines the offending tooth with the air of someone inspecting a cracked roof tile. Then, without ceremony, he wedges the palm stick between your molars to hold the jaw open. You gag. He tells you to breathe through your nose. The string comes next. He loops it tightly around the bad tooth, ties a knot, ties another. You try to remain still, but the pressure makes your eyes water. He steps back, holds the end of the string. He says something under his breath, maybe a blessing, maybe a measurement of force. And then, he yanks. The pain is bright, electric, cosmic. You scream. The goats scatter. Oats. A child cries. For a moment, the world goes white. But then it's out. Blood. Yes. Lots. He quickly presses a wad of linen into your mouth, soaked in beer and honey. You taste copper and sweetness. Your vision wobbles. But the pressure gone. The agony. Less. You lie down on a woven mat, half sobbing, half laughing. Relief is a strange emotion. It hurts, but it also frees. Your tooth is now a trophy, placed in a bowl beside the other. Trophies. You see one molar blackened like charcoal. A canine snapped in half. Yours is pale chipped, still glistening. You feel oddly proud. The craftsman lights a bit of incense and offers a whispered thanks to Thoth for a clean pull. You can't speak. Your tongue is too busy navigating the strange new hole in your mouth. Historians are divided on how often extractions were performed. Some say they were rare, desperate measures. Others believe village healers and craftspeople routinely performed them with rudimentary tools. What's certain is that the tools themselves have never been clearly identified. No ancient Egyptian forceps have been found, but the evidence is in the skulls. Archaeological excavations reveal jaws with clear signs of extraction, missing teeth with healed sockets, roots broken midline. And in at least one case, a molar removed with such precision, modern dentists marveled at the skill. How did they do it? Probably like this. Pressure leverage and a quick tug. A stick for biting, a string for pulling. Maybe a little prayer. And a lot of courage. Some believe the process included magical spells. Specific chants to quiet the tooth demon. One surviving spell describes calling upon a falcon-headed god to cut the pain away with silver wings. You imagine that now, floating above your delirious brain, a divine dentist in bird form plucking your molar mid-flight. Back in your hut, you rest. The bleeding slows. You sip warm beer and chew soft figs with the other side of your mouth. You hold your cheek and wince, but it's a different kind of wince, because the pain is over. At least this pain. And in Egypt, surviving your own tooth is something worth celebrating. Several days pass. Your jaw is healing slowly, tenderly. The hole where your tooth once lived still throbs from time to time, especially when you forget and bite too hard on a fig seed. But something else has started to stir a strange, subtle fascination. You start thinking about teeth, not just yours, but all the ones buried beneath the sand. After all, Egypt is a nation of tombs, and those tombs are full of teeth. Thousands of years later, modern scientists would lift the linen veils of mummified royalty, and commoners alike peering inside with tools your people could only dream of: X-rays, CT scanners, microscopic analysis. And what they found in those ancient jaws told a story far louder than stone. Let's take a stroll through the records, no sandals required. Mummies of all ranks and ages, from young nobles to wizened priests, show extensive tooth wear. Flattened crowns expose dent and even fractured molars. One mummy from the 18th dynasty had a molar so worn the pulp cavity was exposed. Another had an abscess so large it had eroded part of the jawbone. These weren't isolated cases. This was epidemic. And it wasn't just wear and decay. There were surprises too. In some mummies, tiny bits of chaff and stone were found embedded between teeth, literal time capsules of meals chewed 3,000 years ago. In others, cavities were packed with linen or strange herbal mixtures, ancient fillings maybe, or just ritual gestures meant to preserve the body's dignity in death. One famous royal mummy, likely Ramses II, showed signs of severe dental infection. His gums had receded dramatically. Several teeth were missing, and yet his elaborate tomb had once glowed with gold incense and divine protection. The message even gods among men couldn't escape the grind of flour and the ache of infection. In more recent years, advanced CT scanning revealed a female mummy with an abscess that had burst before death, likely contributing to her demise. Her skull was otherwise pristine, her linen wrapping flawless, but her jawbone told the truth. These revelations have changed how we understand Egyptian medicine. They confirm what texts hinted at, that toothache wasn't just a nuisance, it was deadly. Left untreated, infections could spread, triggering fever, swelling, even sepsis. Death by molar. A grim, gnashing end. And yet, despite all the damage, there's rarely any sign of surgical intervention. No metal tools, no bone drills, no signs of anesthesia. In other words, Egyptians might have written the book on medicine, but they skipped the chapter on dentistry. Why some theories suggest they feared the mouth. The breath, after all, was sacred, the path of the soul. To damage it might offend the gods. Others believe pain was simply endured. Life was short. Death was expected. A sore jaw didn't seem like the worst thing that could happen, but not everyone gave up. Some mummies bear evidence of rudimentary attempts, poultices, herbal dressings, even what appear to be plug-like fillings made of resin or wax. These were likely applied post-mortem, a way to ensure the deceased wouldn't suffer in the afterlife. Imagine that even the dead needed their teeth soothed, lest they arrive in the field of reeds complaining. Back in your own time, you run your tongue along the gap in your gums. The space feels alien, but also lighter, cleaner. You wonder what your own mummy will look like someday, what stories your mouth will tell to curious, future eyes. Will they see the wear from gritty bread, the infection that led to a tearful string yank, the relief that followed? They'll never know how you clutched your jaw at night, whispered to the gods, and found solace in mold and honey. But they might see the scar, the healed socket, the absence where a painful presence once lived. Because in the end, teeth are storytellers. Hard, white, enamel-bound relics of every bite, every mistake, every sacred snack. And Egypt is full of stories. Some written in ink, others hidden in molars. The sun hangs low as you sit near the edge of a field, watching the grain sway like an army of golden spears. Your jaw still aches a little, but you're used to it now, a reminder that you survived. You rip off a piece of bread and sip from your beer jug. It's thick, cloudy warm, just like every day. And here in this moment you remember something the temple scribe said as you left even pharaohs crack their teeth. It seemed absurd at the time. How could someone with servants' gold and direct lines to the gods suffer the same misery as a humble grain puller like you? But the evidence doesn't lie. Royal mummies wrapped in silkier linen, buried with shimmering amulets and hieroglyphic blessings, have mouths full of dental disasters. Pharaohs with abscesses, queens with cracked molars, priests with the kind of gum disease that would make a crocodile flinch. Take Tutankhamun, for example. CT scans of his remains show an impacted wisdom tooth and a cleft palate, among other issues. Ramses II, multiple missing teeth, severe wear, likely infection. The living gods of Egypt, it turns out, still had very mortal mouths. Why? Because they ate the same food, the same bread, the same beer. Yes, the palace had better sieves and finer flour, but even royal bakers couldn't filter out every grain of sand or grit. And when your diet is 70% bread-based, the damage is inevitable. Now imagine being royalty with a toothache. You can't show weakness. You can't scream in front of your court. So, what do? You pray harder. You pay more. You summon the best swan in the land. And still, they hand you the same moldy poultice, the same honey compress, the same salt beer rinse. Equality in its own crunchy way. The royal dentists, if we can even call them that, were likely the temple healers stationed closest to the capital. They were educated in the scrolls, perhaps better supplied, but still bound by the same limitations. No steel, no anesthesia, no floss. just linen bronze and divine patience. Some believe certain pharaohs tried to commission new remedies. There's a theory that Queen Hatshepsut's court experimented with date-based gum pastes laced with powdered pearl. That sounds luxurious until you remember pearl is basically glorified sand. Good for rituals, bad for enamel. A lesser-known fact, many tombs include small containers labeled with symbols for mouth oil or tooth balm. These were believed to soothe the dead in the afterlife, an eternal mouthwash for eternal rest. And it wasn't just pharaohs. Their wives, children, even their favorite servants, anyone entombed with privilege, showed the same dental struggles. One noblewoman from the 19th dynasty had all her molars ground nearly flat. Her tomb inscription spoke of grace and laughter, but her jawbone told a different story, pain endured in silence. Back in your field, you run your tongue across your own worn teeth, and wonder, will history remember your pain? Probably not, but in a way that makes it more sacred. You share something with kings and queens, not through gold or titles, but through your broken smile. Bread has bound you all together across time, status, and sand. Historians sometimes struggle to explain how such an advanced society never developed better dental tools. But maybe they didn't see the need. They treated pain as part of life. Not something to be conquered, just managed. After all, you were expected to suffer with dignity. A cracked tooth didn't make you weak. It made you human. So you finish your bread, sip your beer, and smile, crooked, sore, incomplete. But a smile nonetheless. And for a brief, shimmering moment, you feel royal. Night falls over the village. The fire crackles low, casting flickering shadows on the mud-brick walls of your home. You lie on your side, wrapped in a woven linen sheet, staring at the ceiling and trying not to grind your teeth. You've done everything practical poultices honey, even the dramatic string and yank, but the ache never truly leaves. So now you turn to something older, stranger, quieter, magic. In ancient Egypt, medicine wasn't just about herbs and tools. It was about words. Spoken words. Written words. Words with power. The kind that could bend fate, calm storms, and yes, even soothe a throbbing jaw. Tonight you reach for the tiny linen bundle tucked under your mat. Inside is a small carved amulet, a crescent-shaped stone, etched with the symbol for health wrapped in thread and speckled with old wax. It was given to you by your grandmother when you were young, long before your first molar cracked. You hold it to your cheek and begin to whisper the words you were taught. O Sekhmet, Lady of Flame, pull the worm from my tooth. Let the heat depart. Let the mouth be clean. Let the night take the pain. You whisper it again, and again. The rhythm becomes its own kind of balm. Ancient Egyptians believed that many illnesses, including toothaches, were caused by evil spirits or supernatural parasites, tiny demons burrowing into flesh. They called them mouthworms, and they imagined them chewing through enamel, stoking pain with every bite. To combat this, they wrote spells, hundreds of them. Some were carved into stelae. Others were inked onto strips of papyrus or linen, then tied around the neck or wrist. Some were whispered in temple corners, offered in smoky chants alongside oil and flame. A popular one, a plea to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Great scribe who knows the names of every bone, write my pain into forgetting. Let the tooth be struck from the ledger of suffering. Another invoked Bes, the dwarf god of protection, who despite his comical appearance was feared by demons. People would draw his face on bowls and sleep with them beside the bed, hoping he would scare the pain away during the night. And then there were the amulets. Little carved figures of hippos, cats, falcons, each symbolizing protection, healing strength. Some were worn on cords around the neck, others sewn into clothing or hidden in the bandages of the sick. Modern scholars once scoffed at these practices. Now many see them for what they were early forms of psychological relief. The spells worked not because they killed bacteria, but because they calmed the mind, gave people hope, created rituals that gave shape to chaos. In short, they mattered. Tonight, as the fire dies to glowing coals, you trace the amulet's worn edges with your thumb. Your mouth still aches a little, but your breath slows. Your heart softens. The silence feels fuller somehow, safer. You whisper a third spell. This one isn't from a scroll or a priest, it's yours. O pain that sits like a stone in my jaw, roll away with the tide of dreams. Leave me to sleep beneath the stars of my ancestors. You close your eyes. The stars outside blink faintly. Somewhere a jackal howls. And in that still moment, it doesn't matter whether the pain is gone or simply forgotten. The words have worked their spell. You drift into sleep with an amulet pressed to your cheek, and ancient magic curling like smoke in your lungs. You wake up to a quiet morning. The birds are chirping softly from the sycamores, and the first rays of sun paint the walls with a warm golden hue. You feel better. Not healed exactly, but better. Then you move your jaw the wrong way, and the pain flickers back like an old joke you wish you'd forgotten. It's time to get creative. Or desperate. Maybe both. Because for every ancient Egyptian treatment that showed some promise, there were a dozen others that made you question whether the gods were pranking humanity one foul-smelling poultice at a time. Let's begin with an all-time classic burnt onion paste. Yes, onions were prized in Egypt. They were used for flavor embalming and apparently dental nightmares. The belief was that roasting an onion until it charred, then grinding it into a sticky pulp and applying it to the sore area would draw out the infection. The reality, you just smelled like you were being slow cooked. There was also sour wine rinses. Prescribed in cases of swelling and bleeding gums, you'd swish the ancient equivalent of spoiled vinegar around in your mouth while praying not to gag. Some mixtures added powdered acacia bark or salt, both of which sound promising until you realize the average bottle of wine had been sitting in a clay pot for 3 summers in the shade. And then there's nalkeishia, mouse paste. We wish we were joking. Some papyri describe crushing dried mice into a powder, mixing it with various herbs, or in some cases simply water, and applying the resulting mush to inflamed areas. Possibly ingested, possibly topical, definitely questionable. This wasn't limited to teeth either. Mice were a go-to ingredient in many treatments: broken bones, baldness, ear infections. There seemed to be a working theory that mouse gisars medicine. You're not sure if it was because mice were plentiful, easy to catch, or simply had a reputation for vitality. But either way, you are eternally grateful no one has handed you a rodent-based remedy. Yet, another failed remedy. Smoked lizard ash. According to certain temple scrolls, burning a dried lizard until it became ash, mixing it with goat milk and barley flour, and applying it to the jaw was meant to chase away the tooth demons. You can't help but wonder how many people signed up for that treatment more out of curiosity than actual pain relief. Historians today categorize these treatments in a range from possibly useful to absolutely horrifying. And yet they served a purpose. If nothing else, they gave patients the feeling that something was being done, that the pain was being acknowledged. The human need for action, even symbolic action, is ancient. There's a theory that the more unpleasant the remedy, the more powerful people believed it must be. Because why else would you rub boiled bird feather paste into your gums unless it had to work? Back in your hut, you consider your options. You have honey, a bit of salt, a few dried herbs, and no mice. You count that as a win. Still, there's a kind of wonder in it, all the sheer creativity, the attempts, the faith that something, anything, might bring relief. It reminds you that medicine wasn't born in white coats and laboratories. It began in huts like yours, with trial-error prayers and occasionally pest control. You sip a little warm beer, swish it like a rinse, and tell yourself it's medicinal. The bubbles sting a bit, but it beats rodent puree. So if the pain lingers, you'll go back to the temple. You'll ask the Sunwozwak for more bread mold. Maybe try a spell. But for now, you rest. You breathe. You smile crookedly and whisper your thanks to the gods that no one brought you a lizard this morning. Because healing, like everything in Egypt, walks the line between divine mystery and divine comedy. The Nile is your highway today. The boat rocks gently beneath your feet as it glides downstream, heading toward a larger village where you hope to trade some baskets of flax for salt and spices. You sit near the edge, one hand resting on a clay jar, the other pressed tightly to your jaw. The ache is back. Not sharp, just persistent. Like a heartbeat but misplaced. A steady thump inside your cheek as if your molars have learned to drum. Across from you sits a fellow tradesman, older with sun-leathered skin and a quiet smile. He's chewing something carefully, deliberately. Fennel seed, he explains. Good for breath. Sometimes numbs the pain, too. You nod, but the thought of chewing anything feels like a betrayal. As the boat drifts past reed-lined banks and waving children, you think about how many mouths have suffered like this. How many travelers along this very river gritted their teeth and kept rowing. The Nile has seen pharaohs and farmers alike cradle their faces and mutter curses through cracked lips. The pain pulses again. You adjust your seating. Your companion rummages in his pack and pulls out a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside a reed straw, a pinch of powdered myrrh, and a tiny jar of oil. My sister mixes this, he says, offering it to you. Smells awful. Works decent. You dip a finger in and dab it gently on your gum. The taste is bitter, earthy strong, but then something shifts, a subtle cooling. Not quite relief, but a change. Sometimes that's all it takes. As the boat glides on, you hear stories your companion speaks of a woman who once screamed so loudly from toothache, the priest thought she'd been possessed. Of a merchant who lost 3 front teeth to a piece of undercooked goose. Of a boy who rubbed clay on his gums and claimed it worked until it turned to stone. These stories drift with the river's current, half myth, half memory. Toothache, you realize, is a shared human thread woven into every trade route, every village, every cargo of onions and incense. Pain binds people together in quiet, unspoken ways. Everyone you meet has a tale. Everyone has clenched their jaw against the wind and prayed for numbness. Later, you dock at a small riverside village. You trade your goods, nod through the bartering, and avoid smiling too widely. A local healer offers you a reed brush and a prayer stone carved with the eye of Horus. Sleep with it near your mouth, she says. The gods can't ignore what they can see. You tuck it into your satchel. On the return trip, the wind picks up. The sails billow. The boat rocks. But the pain stays steady, familiar now. Manageable. You close your eyes and listen to the water lapping the sides of the boat. Somewhere upriver, a crocodile groans. Somewhere downriver, a temple glows in the dusk. You are one of millions who have floated on this river. Jaw-clenched thoughts adrift, hoping for a cure, settling for a story, trusting that at least for tonight the drum will quiet. And for a while, it does. The stars above you shine like carved alabaster in the ink-black sky. You lie on your mat, half covered in linen, your hand absently resting on your cheek. The pain has dulled again, but the ache lingers just enough to make you wonder. What happens to a toothache when you die? In ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was a journey, a transition, a process more complicated than getting through rush hour in Thebes. And everything had to be in order for the trip to the afterlife. That included your teeth. The embalming process was meticulous. Organs were removed, the body packed with natron salts to dry, then wrapped with layer upon layer of linen resin and amulets. But the mouth that was sacred. It was the portal of breath, the gateway of speech. It had to be preserved even if it was a mess. Some mummies have been found with clear signs of dental disease, rotting molars, exposed roots abscesses filled with resin, not cleaned out, not replaced, just sealed in. Why? Because the Egyptians believed you would need your teeth in the afterlife. Chewing, speaking, laughing, singing hymns in the field of reeds. A missing or broken tooth might be an inconvenience, or worse, a barrier to a full, eternal experience. To ensure readiness, embalmers sometimes placed linen plugs in gaps painted over darkened enamel with resins or wrapped jaws with extra padding to maintain shape. Some tombs included offerings of mouth balms, reed brushes, and tiny jars labeled "for the lips" or "against burning mouth." And there was the ritual of the opening of the mouth, a ceremony performed on the deceased to restore their ability to eat, speak, and breathe in the next world. The priest would touch a ceremonial blade or adze to the lips while chanting sacred words. It was spiritual dentistry at its most theatrical. One funerary text reads, "May your teeth be strong like Horus's spear. May your tongue know sweetness like the lotus. May you chew the bread of eternity and sip the beer of the gods." You imagine it now arriving in the next world, jaw aching and hoping some sympathetic deity hands you a poultice instead of judgment. Would Anubis care that you left life with one less molar? Would Thoth look at your papyrus of deeds and note patient, tolerated pain with dignity? Would Osiris, ruler of the dead, nod approvingly as you arrive, chewing softly on dream bread? We'll never know. But what we do know, thanks to CT scans and tomb inscriptions, is that Egyptians took this seriously. Tooth decay was not just a problem for the living, it was a concern for the soul. Some tombs even show depictions of deities touching the cheeks of the deceased, blessing their jaws. Others include amulets shaped like teeth, symbols of strength, of vitality, of defiance against death's decay. So you lie back, fingers tracing your cheekbone, and feel oddly reassured. Your pain has meaning. It ties you to tradition. It anchors you to a vision of eternity, where even the gods know the mouth must be honored. In the quiet, you murmur your own wish to the dark. Let me arrive whole enough to smile. Let me speak without ache. Let my teeth bite the stars. And with that, you drift again into sleep, guided by a lineage of sore jaws and divine dental care. The morning haze rises from the Nile, like breath from a sleeping god. You sit on a warm stone, watching the villagers stir, each person starting their day, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching limbs, and if they're anything like you, wincing at that familiar twinge of jaw pain. But then you wonder, is your pain the same as theirs? In a land as layered as Egypt, where social roles were carved in limestone and painted in ochre, did some mouths suffer less than others? Let's find out. Start with the Saks, slaves and laborers. Those who pulled stones, dug canals, and carried grain sacks heavier than a scribe's ego. Their food was coarse and basic barley bread, beer, maybe a few onions or lentils. The flour they ate was ground fast and rough, no time for sifting or refinement. Their teeth wore down quickly, often before they turned 30. Abscesses, fractures, infections all common, but treatment rare. If they were lucky, a village healer might offer a herbal wash or a linen wrap, but mostly pain was endured. Stoically, silently. It was just one more burden among many. Then you have the art farmers, of course. Like many of your neighbors. They grew their own food, so quality varied. Some had access to slightly cleaner grain. Some didn't. Their dental health reflected their harvests. A good year meant more figs, dates, and honey. A bad year meant more chewing on dry bread and desperation. They shared remedies among themselves, passed down by grandparents, remembered in half-sung prayers. Toothache was common, yes, but so was community. You suffered together. That counted for something. Now shift focus to the Aussies, scribes. These were the literate elite trained in temples handling documents and taxes. They didn't farm, didn't haul stones, but they still ate the same bread. Their flour might have been a bit finer, their access to honey more reliable. And crucially, they were closer to temple medicine. When a scribe had a bad tooth, he could appeal to a priest, or WNW directly. Some papyri even contain notations from scribes complaining about tooth distress during copying sessions. You imagine one sitting cross-legged, ink-stained, muttering through clenched teeth while reciting prayers to distract himself. And finally, the Prosperous royals. They had everything: jewel-encrusted amulets, golden chalices, the best linen in the land. But their dental lives, not as glamorous. Yes, their food was cleaner. Their bakers were trained. Their flour was sifted multiple times. But they also indulged more wine, more dried fruit, more sugar in their fig cakes. These luxuries, ironically, did more damage than peasant grain ever could. And while they had access to the best healers and the most elaborate spells, they were not immune. Royal mummies showed just as many dental horrors as commoners, sometimes worse, hidden under layers of resin and perfume. So, who suffered less? Not the slaves, not the farmers, not the scribes or the pharaohs. Not really. Because no one escaped the fundamental truth. Egyptian bread was brutal, and medicine could only do so much. But what changed was how people suffered. Slaves endured in silence. Farmers shared stories and soothed with herbs. Scribes wrote about it. Royals ritualized it. Pain was the common thread, but the cushion around it varied. And here you are somewhere in the middle. Not royalty, not slave. Just a man with a sore jaw and a bit of moldy bread. But maybe, just maybe, your pain is less today than yesterday. Maybe it's enough to be seen, to be cared for, to have your ache witnessed by the stars, the Nile, and the quiet mouths of history. You rise, stretch, and smile unevenly, cautiously, but with a sense of place. Because here in the land of gods and grinding stones, every tooth tells a story, and yours is still being written. The sun climbs higher, and the village stirs with the rhythm of daily chores, grinding, hauling, weaving, bargaining. But you are elsewhere today, in a quiet corner of the temple library, squinting at a scroll that crackles like dry reeds with every unroll. The priest scribe lets you look just briefly. He says it's too delicate for long exposure, but you begged. Your jaw still throbs, your curiosity sharper than your pain. This scroll is known among the temple healers as the Papyrus of Pain. Its real name, the Ebers. Papyrus, one of the most famous and oldest surviving medical documents in the world. Dating back over 3,500 years, it stretches over 20 meters when fully unrolled. But today only one section matters to you, the part dealing with dental distress. You lean in close. The symbols swim before your eyes, reed pen strokes forming little birds' loops, snakes' bowls, and tiny jaws. The scribe reads aloud in a measured, soothing tone. To remedy the aching of the teeth, mash the seeds of the carob tree with beer and frankincense. Rub this upon the gums while chanting the words of purification. You nod. Makes sense. Frankincense is antimicrobial. Beer is, well, beer. But the real power, the priest says, is in the ritual. Further down you find more. To cast out the worm that nests in the molar place, crushed sycamore fig root upon the aching site. Wrap the mouth with linen soaked in natron. Sing the hymn of healing from the western wall. The worm again. Always the worm. Some historians now believe this was a metaphor, a way to describe the unseen enemy within the tooth. But others argue the Egyptians may have actually seen wriggling nerve endings in badly decayed teeth and interpreted them as literal pests. One spell is especially vivid. O Ra, strike down the gnawing serpent within. Let the tooth crack like thunder and the pain scatter like sand. You shiver a little. Whether poetic or practical, the language feels alive. The priest gestures to another line, smiling. For the calming of the spirit caused by tooth pain mix, crushed lotus honey and powdered turquoise. Apply with a feather. If the patient weeps, say, "It is the pain leaving." You glance at him. He nods solemnly. That's how I was trained. Beyond the Ebers papyrus, other documents echo the same struggle. The Hearst papyrus, the Berlin papyrus, all filled with formulas, prayers, and what we might now call prescriptions. Some are precise. Others read more like wishful thinking wrapped in herbal syrup. Modern scholars pore over these texts like detectives. What did they get right? What was pure guesswork, and how much of it worked not because of ingredients, but because of belief? One fascinating fact, these scrolls were copied again and again by hand over generations, meaning many someones believed in these remedies enough to preserve them through centuries of sandstorms, floods, and conquest. You look again at the faded ink, the delicate curves of each hieroglyph. You picture the hand that wrote them, steady, careful, perhaps aching from their own mouth pain. You wonder if they paused mid-sentence, rubbed their jaw, and then dipped their reed into ink once more. Because this is not just a papyrus. It's a collective cry, a recorded agony, A how-to manual for surviving something as mundane and maddening as a toothache in a world without steel or sedation. Back in the present, you thank the scribe and step outside into the sun. The world feels louder now, brighter, but something inside you has quieted. You've read your own pain in ancient ink, and somehow that helps. You walk along the edge of the Nile as the wind picks up and sends little spirals of dust across your path. The water glimmers in the late afternoon light. It's peaceful, but your mind is elsewhere, still caught in the corridors of the temple. The ink of the papyri, the grain of the bread, and the constant throb in your cheek. You can't help but wonder, were these remedies? These spells, these jars of moldy bread, brilliant or lucky? Turns out historians have been arguing about that for centuries. Some scholars believe the ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time pioneers of a practical observational medicine that paved the way for everything from antiseptics to surgery. Others argue they were simply very good guessers. Observant, yes, but still operating within a framework of magic myth and ritual rather than true medical understanding. Let's take moldy bread as a case study. Today we know certain molds produce penicillin-like substances. So when Egyptians used fermented bread as a poultice, were they early microbiologists? Or just too poor to throw away spoiled food supporters of the pioneer viewpoint to texts like the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri? These scrolls include clear instructions for diagnosing symptoms, separating treatable injuries from fatal ones, and using antiseptic substances like honey and copper salts. They argue that these were early attempts at systematic medicine, flawed, yes, but logical. Then there are the skeptics. They point out that for every sensible recipe, there's one involving crushed lizards, dead mice, or chanting to banish tooth demons. They see Egyptian medicine not as science, but as spiritual performance, a mix of trial and error wrapped in layers of religious theater. And it's not just about remedies. It's about why those remedies worked or didn't. Did they understand cause and effect? Or did they just remember what seemed to help and copy it into another scroll? You stop at the riverbank and kneel to splash water on your face. The coolness soothes your cheeks, but the deeper question lingers. Could your healer back in the temple explain why the moldy bread eased your swelling? Or did he simply repeat what he had learned from his teacher and his teacher before that? Even modern scholars can't always agree. Some argue that Egyptians laid the groundwork for later Greco-Roman medicine, which in turn influenced modern Western science. Others say that's giving them too much credit, that while they contributed to medical history, their framework was too tangled in myth to be called science. But maybe that's the wrong lens. Maybe the power of Egyptian medicine wasn't in its accuracy, but in its persistence, its humanity, its refusal to give up on healing even without microscopes or modern theories. Think of it this way. For thousands of years, people kept records, performed rituals, observed results, and passed them down. Yes, some of it was misguided, but some of it worked. And in a world where death was always a shadow, a way even a glimmer of relief was worth preserving. Back in your village, you sit under a fig tree and chew slowly on a sprig of mint. Your tooth still reminds you it's there, but the edge has softened. The pain is no longer a scream, just a whisper. You think about all the people before you, the farmers, the scribes, the pharaohs, all of them aching, all of them trying. Maybe they didn't know exactly why something worked. Maybe they didn't need to. Because in the end, healing is more than knowledge. It's intention. It's repetition. It's trying again and again and again. So you lean back, let the sunlight warm your face, and smile, a little crookedly, a little carefully. But smile you do. The night air is cool as you lie awake staring at the ceiling beams of your small mud brick home. Your jaw, now more ghost than tormentor, barely aches. You press your fingertips to the spot where the pain once pulsed like a war drum. Nothing. Just a faint tenderness. A memory. And it all comes back to that moment when the Eswoba on W mashed up moldy bread and honey and pressed it against your face. Could it really have worked? Modern scientists have asked the same question. And surprisingly, the answer leans toward yes. Let's break it down not with chants or incense this time, but with petri dishes and microscopes. Certain molds, especially those from the Penicillium family, are known to produce antibiotic substances. The most famous of these penicillin was discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928, when mold accidentally grew on a culture plate. But the mold itself, the idea of it, was known long before. In laboratory settings, researchers have recreated Egyptian-style poultices using ancient bread-making techniques, unsifted emmer wheat, fermented in warm, humid conditions until visible mold bloomed. When these were applied to bacterial cultures in controlled environments, some demonstrated genuine antimicrobial activity. Not penicillin-level miracles, but enough to suggest a primitive form of infection control. Pair that with honey, another Egyptian favorite, and you get a double dose of healing. Honey is hygroscopic. It draws moisture out, naturally acidic, and contains small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. It's hostile to most bacteria, and ancient civilizations knew this instinctively. Honey has been found still preserved in sealed jars inside Egyptian tombs, perfectly edible after thousands of years. So mold and honey, surprisingly effective. Now imagine wrapping that mixture in linen, Egypt's version of a sterile dressing. Linen breathes Wicks moisture, and when soaked in herbal infusions or beer, becomes both barrier and balm. It's easy to romanticize this as ancient genius. But let's be fair, much of this came from observation. Trial and error. Desperation, even. Someone noticed that a wound healed better when bread was left to age. Someone saw that honey reduced swelling. Someone decided to combine the two. And here's where the prehistoric logic shines. Ancient medicine didn't need microscopes. It needed patterns. Repeatable results. Relief, even without understanding. Were there dangers? Absolutely. Not all molds are friendly. Some are toxic. Some could make an infection worse. There was no quality control in a clay jar on a temple shelf. But in a world without antibiotics, even a mild edge against bacteria was worth chasing. Today, medical historians marvel at how close Egyptian medicine sometimes got to modern protocols, despite being wrapped in myth and ritual. Their remedies might not have been scientific in the strict sense, but they worked often enough to be remembered, copied, ritualized, and buried with honor. And maybe, just maybe, that's the definition of success in a time without proof. You lie in the dark and think of that healer in the temple. His fingers stained with ink and herb paste, his scrolls marked with symbols that might now line museum glass. You wonder if he knew what he was doing, or if he just hoped it would work. You smile to yourself. Hope, after all, is its own kind of medicine. And now, as your breath slows and your body melts deeper into the mat, you whisper a quiet thank you not to the gods, but to the mold. The weird, squishy, smelly hero of this story. Because in the end, it wasn't a sword or a spell that saved you. It was bread, left a little too long in the corner of the pantry, and you're still here to smile about it. The Nile flows quietly tonight. Its surface glows with moonlight, smooth and silver, as if the river itself has decided to whisper. You're drifting literally on a slow-moving barge stretched out under the open skyhead, resting on a sack of barley hand, lazily skimming the cool water. The breeze smells of sweet grain, distant smoke, and the faintest trace of lavender. The ache in your jaw is gone, or so distant, it no longer matters. You've become part of the river now, calm, fluid, gentle. The boat carries you past temples and palms, past sleeping herons and flickering fires on shore. In the distance, someone hums a lullaby. A priest, a mother. The wind, you've brought nothing with you but the memories, the bread, the mold, the scrolls, the gods. And maybe somewhere in your satchel, a crumb of honeyed linen and an amulet shaped like a smiling cat. You feel weightless, painless, softened by time and rituals. Your teeth are still your own, some of them worn, one of them missing, but all of them yours. And in this moment, that's enough. You recall the W&W's voice, low and steady. The pain must exit the body like steam from the bath. Maybe it did. Maybe it was carried off in the incense smoke, or dissolved in sour beer, or whispered away by the gods of small miracles. The stars blink slowly overhead. You breathe in deep and slow. You smile half asleep, and let the river carry you onward. The wind down begins. The night settles around you like a second skin. Each sound grows quieter, each breath deeper. Your limbs feel warm, wrapped in linen, held by time. No more grinding, no more spells, just softness, gentle weight, the hush of eternity brushing your cheek like cool cotton. You imagine yourself in a boat drifting through a world made only of stars and stories. The pain is gone now, tucked into some forgotten corner of history, and you, dear traveler, are lighter for it. May your dreams be free of ache. May your rest be sweet as lotus and strong as honey. Sleep well and smile.